I'm Glenn McGinnis, and this is Outburst. On the program, with global instability on the rise, are you less likely to travel abroad?
I don't think that the level of instability in the world right now dissuades me any more than it would have 10 or 20 years ago.
Just traveling to travel, I don't think it's a good time to do that.
Frankly, there's always a risk no matter where you go.
Just with everything, the chaos in the world, not interested.
But first, short-term rental platforms like Airbnb have been a go-to solution for travelers for quite some time now, looking for an alternative to hotels. Typically, they stay in homes or cottages or even apartments, giving tenants that at-home feeling away from home. But in recent years, a surge of people buying these properties for these purposes has given way to the theory that it affects the housing crisis and drives rental prices up. So, have short-term rentals made long-term rentals more unaffordable for the many? Our question.
Do you think platforms like Airbnb are affecting rental inventory?
That's a good question. I think they probably do, but I use Airbnb and I like it. So they probably do have an effect.
A net negative or a net positive?
Negative.
Yeah,
and a negative. Well, because a lot of property is bought for or used for Airbnb, so that property is not going to be sold.
Well, I do think so to some degree, because people are making the choice to take their properties and Airbnb them for a higher income profit than renting them by the month. So we are actually rental property owners ourselves. We just rent by the month, but there's certainly a big market out there for people that are choosing to purchase homes as rental properties but Airbnb them instead. So I would say so, yes.
Yes, I think they are.
In what way?
I think it's reducing the amount of rental space that's available.
And is that a problem?
I believe it is, yeah.
Any solutions?
I don't know what the solution is. Rental prices are going up. We need more space. Obviously, private owners have the right to use their space how they want, so I don't know what the solution is.
But I mean, I'm a capitalist. I'm happy to see anything that makes the economy tick. And if that's people are buying properties and turning them into Airbnbs and starting their own little companies, own little businesses, tax revenue comes from that. It promotes tourism. So for me, I don't have a big problem with it. But understanding that it does affect people who are next door, etc. So there has to be probably some rules around that, and maybe even some taxes around that as well, probably. So
I think they are, because since it's such a huge, wide known website and company, it's like a very big thing. I know I'm from Vancouver, and in Vancouver, and I think it's British Columbia, the law is that you can only use Airbnb if it's your primary residence. So you can't just own a place and just rent it off to Airbnb specifically, which I think is a good law in preventing people from just making money off of things of just having a place and having people move in quickly. And I definitely think it has a big effect, and I think that it's making it. I think it probably is making prices go up.
I think it should have an impact, especially in the market like the ones that we have now in Canada, where there is a shortage of available housing. So if you have more units that are taken from Airbnb for a private profit, then those units are not on the market. So obviously it's a matter of law of offer and demand. So there's less offer, and demand keeps rising because there's more population and not more housing that is built. So yes, there's definitely an impact. Whether it's big or not, it's another debate, but there's an impact for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I mean there's evidence that's a big issue, because it's mainly coming from corporations that are buying these Airbnbs. Corporations should definitely not be allowed to buy houses at all for profit, because it takes away thousands of, could be 1 million homes just out of normal people's pockets, and it just raises the prices, and they just increase rent that way, they increase housing prices that way, and You know, and then when we have inflation, they're just going to let go of all these homes, and that's just going to crash the entire housing market for everyone. So they should definitely not be allowed to do that stuff.
I would think Airbnb has diminished the rental inventory. There are a certain relative number of units which definitely have been bought up or rented and are being used for Airbnb purposes as opposed to for long-term rentals, and have obviously therefore maybe contributing to the housing shortage in Montreal.
Yes, I do. I believe so. They just keep putting up the prices and everything's to follow. So, I mean, Airbnb is what people can get out of it. So the more they push it up, it affects the rental costs. Overall, I'm saying an overall platform.
No, what I do believe Airbnb is for 1 or 2 nights stay, and the person uses their discretion at what they charge. And I find what drives rent up would be the costs of fuel, heating, lights. You know, the bare essentials went up, so the landlord drives the price up a little. And plus, no rent control, so it's open game for the landlords.
I think it does affect the rental market, but I think it's a necessity. I think people like it. I think maybe they should have some restrictions on Airbnb, but yeah, I think it's a good thing to have.
I think when people have Airbnbs, some of them abuse the system. I think they take advantage of people. I think maybe they need to be limited in the amount of rentals that they're allowed per year, maybe.
The affordability issue of energy and home heating, be it oil, gas, electric, or otherwise, has been plaguing countless Canadians with each passing month. Since the pandemic began almost 4 years ago, Canadians have been paying more for virtually everything, which can be traced back to higher energy prices. We took our cameras to the streets to ask people what could possibly be done to bring some relief to consumers. Our question:
what needs to be done to make energy costs more affordable?
Maybe turning ourselves into new energy sources, like except of depending on oil and petrol, we could depend on, you know, just there's so many renewable energy sources. I think we should concentrate on those ones except yeah, that's pretty much it.
Again, it's a matter of law and offer. So if you want the energy to be more affordable, you need to put more offer. So I think here it's clear we have a lot of offer because of hydroelectricity. So our electricity is cheap and it's green. So other countries that are facing similar problems should invest more in renewable energies, and after a certain time, then the price will drop.
That's kind of hard because, you know, like Saudi Arabia has such a hard grip on oil. You know, it's like you know, it's like the mob in control of oil. You know, I forgot what their group's called, Saudico or Armico or whatever it is, but they have such a strong grip on oil prices. All they have to do is just like ease production and prices shoot up. They have complete manipulative control. So I don't know if there's even possibly a way for any Western country to manipulate or ease the cost of oil without ourselves drilling our own oil in the West. I know America has huge reserves, Canada has huge reserves, but then you get, you know, the climate change folks who are like, don't drill. So kind of stuck in a hard place where I guess, you know, the only way forward to make everyone happy is green energy.
Well, I do understand out east there is a program for heat pumps. I agree with that. The $5,000 rebate's pretty good. However, it costs $15,000 plus to install, so once you take the $5,000 off, you're still stuck with $10,000 bill. Plus, your electric bill goes up as well. And the energy costs in Nova Scotia is not too cheap, actually. And I was running an oil furnace at home, so I know about the carbon tax and everything too.
I think ultimately renewable energy is going to be a lot more affordable, but to get there is a problem. In the meantime, I don't really know how you make energy a lot more affordable in terms of fossil fuel when the primary cost is out of our hands. It's an international oil market. You can affect that around the edges possibly, but quite frankly, that's the nature of the energy that we're bought into. As and when we're reliant on solar and wind, the fuel won't cost anything, but to get there is a long and expensive process.
I know there's a lot of good solar solutions out there in a lot of cities. I know a lot of cities are turning to solar and wind power and things that are not really relying on limited sources of energy. So I think if we maybe turn to something that's more reusable, or something like, obviously like the big wind turbines, maybe we could get some better energy out there.
It directly got to go to the government, but it's not a matter of the energy costs, it's the tax on the energy costs. So the taxation, I mean, this carbon tax, I don't know where it's going. I'm not pro, I'm not con. I don't know enough about it to comment, but I believe the taxing is bad enough. Also, the oil industry is partly to blame, but I believe that we need to probably develop more natural resource here in Canada instead of going abroad to get our oil and natural gas.
You know, I think gas prices are inevitable, you know, the increase in prices, and we need gas and oil industry. I understand that we need to break free of it, but it's what built the country's infrastructure, and I think that we need to gradually move away from it, but not at the cost of you know, Alberta's economy either.
Well, I think that we need to focus on electric cars more, but we need to make them more affordable, because right now they're out of reach for most of the general population, but I certainly think that's the main thing that we can do.
I think, again, looking at electric cars is a way to go, but we don't have the infrastructure set. So, I mean, even to consider, I mean, that would be the type of car I would love to go with next, but we're not ready for that. I think that would really make an impact on our consumption of gas. And
you know, you've got to just hold the line. You know, taxes are derived out of it, and we're always looking for more and more money, so you can't really do anything about that, I suppose. I guess the best thing is for all of us to try to be a little bit more responsible in how we use energy, and promote more use of, you know, electric cars, better insulating your home, things of that nature. I think that's our best bet.
How many Canadian prime ministers served during the 1950s? 1, 2, or 3?
It's an excellent question. I'm going to say 2.
I'm going to guess 2. 2.
2. 3.
2.
1.
3. 2.
Absolutely correct.
Write this down in history. I am a smarty pants. Thank you. That made my whole day.
During the 1950s, Canada was served by 2 prime ministers. The first, Louis Saint Laurent, was prime minister from 1948 to 1957. He was also known to many Canadians as Uncle Louis. He was prime minister during the Korean War. He ended Canadian legal appeals to the British House of Lords, allowing the Supreme Court of Canada to be the country's highest court. It was on his watch that Newfoundland joined Canada, and he was also the first prime minister to live at 24 Sussex Drive. The second, John Diefenbaker, was Saint Laurent's successor and was prime minister from 1957 to 1963. He was also known as Dief the Chief. During Diefenbaker's 6 years as prime minister, he was responsible for the Canadian Bill of Rights, the first federal law to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. He extended federal voting rights to include First Nations peoples. And John Diefenbaker is also the prime minister who appointed Ellen Fairclough as Canada's first female cabinet minister.
With tensions escalating in different parts of the world in recent times, some people here in Canada may feel it's not a good time to travel outside of the country right now. But some people will tell you it's fine to travel depending on where you're going, and they'll go there without hesitation. So we took to the streets to ask Canadians if they feel comfortable with leaving the country these days. Our question:
with global instability on the rise, are you less likely to travel abroad?
People have asked us to go on trips with them this year and overseas in Europe and that, and just with everything, the chaos in the world, not interested. We have a new grandson, so we'd rather stick close to home. We love to travel in Ontario when we do that quite a bit in the summer and the falls.
I think we'll be more selective in and travel with groups more than individual. But no, I think it's important to understand the global impact and the beautiful world that's out there.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, I agree. It's not going to slow us down, but we will be selective and careful where we go. And but we won't stop us from traveling, that's for sure.
No.
Why?
Because I'm not going in that direction particularly, and frankly, you know, there's always a risk no matter where you go. You're out on the highway, there's a risk. If you're traveling to the U.S., there's risk. I don't plan to go to a war zone, so, you know, I'll take my chances.
I wouldn't be going to the Middle East. But yeah, you got to be conscious of that to a degree. But you can't live in your basement. You gotta take some risks in life.
No, I'd still travel. Sorry, I gotta say, because I love traveling and I think it's good and healthy.
It does. I don't think that the level of instability in the world right now dissuades me any more than it would have 10 or 20 years ago. But then the places that I would probably choose to travel to have generally been pretty stable then and now anyway.
So it's a consideration if you were...
Absolutely, it's a consideration.
Yes, definitely. There's so much going on. There's just so much going on, and I think financially, but with everything that's going on in the world right now, I don't find it's a time to travel.
It's going to be hot spots, and you just keep yourself knowledgeable. But for the most part, I don't think it would affect us too much. I mean, we traveled through COVID, we traveled through all sorts of things. But you know, you still have to be mindful of what's going on out there.
We always consider what is happening in a country before we visit. We've traveled quite a bit since we retired, but it's always a consideration. When we went to Africa, we chose Botswana because there's no guns on their safari drives. We wouldn't consider traveling to India or Jordan, so it's always a consideration. Even though we travel quite extensively, we research the country first.
I'm definitely not going to Israel. But I mean, any country that the West is friends with is pretty easy to travel to. England, Ireland, Australia. I mean, those are really good touristy spots. I'm not inclined to go to any Asian countries, but the violence didn't really persuade me to go there either. You know, a lot of the hot spots are places I would have never really wanted to go to in the first place. So probably not at this time. If it expands to other countries, maybe, but we'll see.
Well, I like to travel, so basically, I don't know, hopefully it's not gonna degenerate too much, hopefully, but it doesn't look good right now, so I don't know.
No?
Nah.
Here we are.
Here we are.
We're
We're three Australians here in Canada, yeah, so we're living our best life.
We live in Canada, but yeah.
I don't, I'm visiting. So, you know, has it affected me one iota?
But saying that, we're going to Guatemala and Mexico in 5 days, so it's not affecting us in the slightest.
No, I think instability is regional in most cases. So there are still a lot of places on the planet that are still stable. So no, I think I will still travel.
I don't think so. I think that knowing that I live in Canada and knowing that Canada is my home and I can come back to my home in Canada and feel stable, I think that I'm okay, and I always have wanted to travel abroad, and I know that I will at some point. And I think that knowing that I'm from Canada gives me a little more security in that, and makes me feel a little more safe in doing so.
I think I'm gonna still study abroad.
Yeah, you just gotta, I don't know.
Just choose where you're going carefully, be cautious, check the list of countries that are like unadvised by the government, and just stay mindful when you're there of what's going on in the neighboring countries. Like, don't be a lack of empathy.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The only problem with like checking the list of like countries that Canada made is that it's very like, I don't know how to explain it. It's very like Canada's point of view, and it doesn't mean that country isn't safe to go to. So it's also to like just do research about where you're going, make sure it's safe.
Expanding medical assistance in dying to include those who suffer from severe mental illness can be controversial at the best of times. Medically assisted dying legislation was passed back in 2016 for those who have a foreseeable death and request it. But including those who suffer from severe mental illness can complicate things greatly, especially the legislation drafted around it. Supporters of this feel anyone who suffers from chronic and severe mental illness should have the right to end their own life, just like someone with a terminal illness, without changing the legislation. But some will ask, are they mentally stable enough to make such a significant decision? We took this question to Canadians.
Do you support medically assisted dying for people who suffer from mental illness?
Wow, that's a really tough one. I think it has to be taken on an individual basis. Generally, I would say that everything possible has to be done for a person first, and I don't think that our system has been set up to address that. I think even with my own experience since COVID, mental health supports are so limited for anybody, even those that are empowered to advocate for themselves. The supports aren't there. So I can see how people would get to that point of desperation, but I think the system has to do better first. The supports have to be there for them first.
I would argue that if you have done all you can, you've been to a psychiatrist, you're on certain prescriptions and it's still not working, and you are down, you're out of options, I would argue that the government should probably work towards building resources for that. I know they're doing research on psilocybin therapy now and potentially legalizing that like marijuana, and there are antidepressants and anti-anxiety in some more illegal drugs, but I don't know if that's the option we want to take. I do feel though if you want to have assisted suicide with a medical professional, you should have that option, but I would really, really urge people to go through every facet that they can before that becomes even an option.
Yes, but I think that's a pretty complicated question. Like, it would require a lot of parsing about what sort of mental illnesses we're talking about, the degree to which a person is still capable of making those decisions.
Case by case.
Yeah, case by case.
Case by case for sure, and there's got to be involvement of some sort of medical or including psychological assessments to establish and confirm that competency.
I know that the medical assistance in death is a very careful procedure. I know that a lot of people do it for like terminal cancer as well, just to be like so they know when the end is, and I think that that's something that's important. I think that when you have a mental illness, I think it needs to, I know that it's a very thought out procedure and it's not just anybody can do it, but I think that it needs to be very carefully thought about, because sometimes if you have a mental illness, you may not be thinking straight as well. And so I think that if there's people around you that support you, I think it's a good, it's good that we have that option and that availability for people who feel like they need that. But I am glad that it's a process that's taking a lot of care and a lot of thought about, because otherwise, if anybody could do it, it'd be a sad time.
It needs more research, but I think that there are some cases that it's very extreme. So yes, it just needs the right amount of research to say yes to someone, but I wouldn't be against it at all.
Yeah, I'm not against it, but I think also it needs more research, because if someone wants to like die, that prefer to die instead of like being ill, is their decision and is their body. But like I guess they need to like be in the worst case or something to like wish to die.
You should be in control of your own life, and if you're a free citizen and you have the power to choose how you live your life, I think you should also have the power to decide how you end it.
I think it's been difficult for society to accept, but I think that's the direction we're going in. I don't really object to it. I have a friend who took medically assisted dying for other reasons, multiple myeloma in his case, but I think that I basically think that people have that right in the end, if that's what they want.
Yes and no.
Tell me why.
Well, yes, if a person is really suffering bad, hearing voices constantly, and has a disruptive life to themselves and others, and could be potentially violent, maybe they can make that choice on their own. But there's other cases where a mentally challenged person can't really make that determination, so somebody can't make it for them. So
that's a tough one. I think in principle, yes, but in practice, how you have sufficiently informed consent in the case of mental illness is an extremely difficult question, both ethically and practically.
That's a tough one. That's a very tough one. Mentally, well, if they're aware, yes. If they're not aware, then it's debatable. That's what I'm looking on that. I know I have a friend of mine that actually he had medically assisted his parents, but they were in their 90s and 100s, so there was really no choice. And also, I guess, something as far as a grave illness also too. Yeah, but I would agree, yes.
Yes, I do. Why? They shouldn't have to suffer, but if they have a wish for to do it on their own schedule, I feel that's their right.
Thanks for watching this episode of Outburst on CPAC. If you have any comments about this show or any other show, you can find us on social media. You can also find us on our website at www.cpac.ca. I'm Glenn McGinnis, and on behalf of my colleagues at the Cable Public Affairs Channel, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.